Blood trickled down Beatrice Sinclair's face as the coarse rope around her wrists burned deeper into her skin with every jolt of the horse. The angry crowd's jeers melted into a cacophony of hatred, drowning out her cries as she was dragged through the dusty main street of Colfax, New Mexico territory. Her crime: speaking out against the corrupt mayor who had stolen land from widows whose husbands died in the silver mines. Flynn Ironwood watched from the boardwalk, his weathered hand instinctively moving to the Colt revolver at his hip. Something about this spectacle turned his stomach. He'd seen plenty of frontier justice in his 30 years, but this wasn't justice, it was madness. The woman's face was bloodied but defiant as Sheriff Walter's deputy paraded her through town like a trophy. "This is what happens to troublemakers," Deputy Grayson shouted, spurring his horse faster as Beatrice stumbled and fell, her body now being dragged fully along the rutted dirt road. Flynn had been in Colfax less than a week, just long enough to stock up on supplies before heading to his newly purchased ranch outside town. He didn't know the woman, didn't know the politics, but he knew cruelty when he saw it. "Enough," he muttered, stepping off the boardwalk. The crowd parted as he strode forward, his tall frame and the determined set of his jaw causing even the most raucous spectators to fall silent. "That's far enough," Flynn called out, his voice cutting through the commotion like a knife. Deputy Grayson turned in his saddle, sneering. "Mind your business, stranger." "I'm making it my business." Flynn moved with purpose, catching the horse's bridle with one hand while the other drew his knife. The deputy reached for his pistol, but Flynn's eyes promised consequences that made him hesitate. "This woman is under arrest. This woman is half dead," Flynn countered, slicing through the rope in one clean motion. Beatrice collapsed fully to the ground, gasping for breath. "And I don't see any legal proceeding happening here." Sheriff Walters pushed through the crowd, hand on his gun. "You're interfering with the law, mister." Flynn knelt beside Beatrice, shielding her with his body while keeping his eyes on the sheriff. "Funny kind of law you have in Colfax. Where I come from, even criminals get a trial before punishment." "She'll get her trial," Walters growled. "After the town sees what happens to those who spread lies about respectable men." Flynn helped Beatrice to her feet, supporting her weight as she swayed. "Seems to me the only crime I've witnessed today is being committed by men wearing badges." A murmur ran through the crowd. Some looked away, shame creeping across their features. Others looked emboldened, as if someone had finally given voice to their own unspoken thoughts. "Take her if you want," Sheriff Walters finally said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "But understand you've made enemies today. Powerful ones." Flynn met his gaze steadily. "Wouldn't be the first time." He turned to Beatrice. "Can you walk, madam?" She nodded weakly, her eyes a startling shade of amber meeting his with a mixture of gratitude and wariness. "I can manage." "My horse is hitched outside the general store," Flynn said quietly. "We're leaving town. Now." The crowd parted as they moved slowly down the street. Flynn could feel dozens of eyes on his back, could practically smell the tension in the air, but no one moved to stop them. At the general store, Flynn helped Beatrice onto his chestnut stallion before swinging up behind her. She was trembling, whether from pain or fear he couldn't tell. "Hold tight," he instructed, wrapping one arm securely around her waist as he took the reins with his other hand. They rode out of Colfax at a steady trot, neither speaking until the town was well behind them. "Why did you help me?" Beatrice finally asked, her voice hoarse from screaming. Flynn considered the question as they rode toward the foothills where his new ranch waited. "Because it wasn't right," he said simply. Then, after a moment, "and because no one else was going to." Beatrice fell silent again, but her breathing had steadied, Flynn could feel her heartbeat gradually slowing where her back pressed against his chest. "I'm Flynn Ironwood," he offered. "Beatrice Sinclair," she replied softly. "And though you may regret it soon enough, Mr. Ironwood, I am forever in your debt." As the sun began its descent behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the New Mexico landscape, Flynn wondered what sort of trouble he'd just invited into his life. Yet somehow, with this wounded but unbowed woman in his arms, the trouble seemed worth it. The Ironwood Ranch came into view as dusk settled over the land, a modest but sturdy house with a barn and corral nearby. Flynn had purchased its site unseen 3 months ago from a widow heading east, gambling his savings on starting fresh after years of drifting. "It's not much," Flynn said as he helped Beatrice down from the horse. She swayed slightly, and he kept a steadying hand at her elbow. "It's sanctuary," she answered, her voice gaining strength. In the fading light, Flynn could better assess her injuries. Her dress was torn and dirty, her face scraped on one side and her wrists raw and bleeding where the rope had cut into them. "Let's get you cleaned up," he said, leading her inside. The interior was sparsely furnished, a table with 4 chairs, a small sofa, a wood stove, and open doorways leading to 2 small bedrooms. Flynn lit the lamps, then retrieved his medical supplies from a trunk. "Sit," he instructed, pulling out a chair. "I need to tend those wounds." Beatrice complied wordlessly, watching as he poured water into a basin and gathered clean cloths. When he knelt before her and reached for her hands, she flinched involuntarily. "I won't hurt you, Miss Sinclair," Flynn said gently. "Beatrice," she corrected, forcing herself to extend her injured wrists. "And I know, it's been a trying day." Flynn worked in silence, cleaning the abrasions with a thoroughness that spoke of experience. "You've done this before," Beatrice observed. "Served 4 years as a field medic during the war," he explained, carefully applying salve to her wrists. "Saw more than my share of injuries." "Union?" "Yes, madam," Beatrice nodded. "My father and brother, too, neither came home." Flynn looked up at her, seeing the old grief etched in her expression. "I'm sorry." "It was a long time ago," she said, though her tone suggested the wound was still fresh. "My mother passed last year. I came west for a fresh start." "And instead found trouble in Colfax," Flynn remarked, moving to clean the scrapes on her face. Beatrice's jaw tightened. "I found injustice in Colfax. Mayor Hollister and his cronies have been systematically stealing mining claims from widows who can't work them themselves. When I started helping them file legal protests, organizing them to speak with one voice." She winced as Flynn dabbed at a particularly deep cut near her temple. "Well, you saw how that ended." Flynn's expression darkened. "Sounds like these women were lucky to have you in their corner." "For all the good it did them." Bitterness laced her words. "Now I've been run out of town and they're still at the mercy of those thieves." "You need rest," Flynn said, finishing his ministrations. "We can figure out next steps tomorrow." He showed her to the smaller bedroom, apologizing for the Spartan accommodations. "I just moved in myself. Haven't had time to make it properly livable." "It's perfect," Beatrice assured him, fatigue evident in every line of her body. "Mr. Ironwood Flynn, I cannot thank you enough." "No need for thanks." He hesitated in the doorway. "I'll be just across the hall if you need anything." As he turned to go, Beatrice called out softly, "Why did you really help me? The full truth this time." Flynn considered the question carefully. "My mother taught me that standing by while wrong is done makes you complicit in that wrong." He met her gaze directly. "And maybe I'm tired of drifting through life without taking a stand." A ghost of a smile touched Beatrice's lips. "Well, you've certainly taken one now." "Get some rest, Beatrice. Tomorrow will bring its own troubles." And indeed it did. Flynn rose before dawn, as was his habit, only to find Beatrice already awake and standing on the porch, watching the sunrise paint the distant mountains gold and crimson. "You should be resting," he admonished, joining her with 2 cups of coffee. She accepted the cup gratefully. "I've been thinking. I need to return to Colfax." Flynn nearly choked on his coffee. "That would be unwise." "Perhaps," she conceded, "but I made promises to those women." Sarah Jensen lost her husband in a cave 3 months ago. The claim was finally starting to produce when Mayor Hollister's men forced her out. Mary Callahan has 3 children under 10 years old. That mining claim is all she has to feed them. Flynn studied her over the rim of his cup. Her face was still bruised, but there was a fire in those amber eyes that impressed him. "And what do you propose to do? They nearly killed you yesterday." "I have documents, evidence of the fraudulent transfers. I hid them before they came for me. If I could retrieve them and get them to the territorial judge in Santa Fe." "And how exactly are you planning to slip back into town unnoticed?" Flynn interrupted. "You're not exactly anonymous after yesterday's spectacle." Beatrice fell silent, frustration evident in the set of her shoulders. "I have a better idea," Flynn finally said. "I can go into town. No one will think twice about a new rancher picking up supplies." Hope brightened her features. "Would you? The documents are hidden beneath a loose floorboard in my room at the boarding house. Mrs. Fairchild runs the place and she's sympathetic to our cause." "It's risky," Flynn warned. "If Walters or the mayor suspect, I know," Beatrice cut in. "But those women have no one else." Flynn sighed, already knowing he'd do it. Something about this woman's courage and determination resonated with him. "I'll need detailed instructions on where to find these papers." Relief softened Beatrice's expression. "Thank you. I'll draw you a map." She paused, studying him curiously. "You don't know me. You owe me nothing. Yet you keep risking yourself." Flynn leaned against the porch railing, considering his answer. "Maybe I'm making up for times I should have acted but didn't." He gazed out at the land stretching before them, his land now. "Or maybe I just don't like bullies." They spent the morning planning. Beatrice drew a detailed map of her room at the boarding house and wrote a note for Mrs. Fairchild explaining the situation. Flynn prepared for the journey, checking his weapons and saddling his horse. "I should be back by nightfall," he told her as he mounted up. "There's food in the pantry, and the rifle above the mantel is loaded." "I can take care of myself," Beatrice assured him, though her battered appearance somewhat contradicted her words. Flynn nodded, acknowledging her spirit if not her current physical condition. "Bolt the door behind me. Don't open it for anyone but me." The ride to Colfax took just over an hour. Flynn approached cautiously, taking the back roads into town. The main street looked deceptively normal, people going about their business, wagons rolling by, the saloon already doing a brisk trade despite the early hour. Flynn hitched his horse outside the general store, adjusting his hat low over his eyes before stepping inside. The shopkeeper, a heavyset man with mutton chop whiskers, eyed him warily. "You're the fella who took that troublemaker woman yesterday," he stated bluntly. Flynn kept his expression neutral as he placed a list of supplies on the counter. "Just need these items if you'd be so kind." The shopkeeper made no move toward the list. "Sheriff's been looking for you." "Has he now?" Flynn met the man's gaze steadily. "And why would that be?" "Last I checked, helping an injured person wasn't against the law." That woman was stirring up trouble, turning good folk against the mayor with her wild accusations. Flynn leaned forward slightly. "The supplies, if you please, unless you're not interested in doing business." After a tense moment, the shopkeeper began gathering the items on the list. "Your money's still good, I suppose, but you'd be wise to distance yourself from that woman. She's poison in this town." "Duly noted," Flynn replied dryly. With his purchases secured, Flynn made his way casually toward the boarding house Beatrice had described. It sat on a side street, a well-maintained two-story building with a small sign identifying it as Fairchild's Lodging. The interior was clean and modestly decorated. A plump, gray-haired woman looked up from her desk as Flynn entered, her eyes narrowing in recognition. "You're him," she said quietly. "The one who helped Miss Sinclair." Flynn removed his hat. "Mrs. Fairchild, I presume?" she nodded, glancing nervously toward the windows. "You shouldn't be here. The sheriff has men watching this place, expecting her to return or send someone." "I need to retrieve something from her room," Flynn explained, keeping his voice low. "Documents that could help stop what's happening to the mining widows." Mrs. Fairchild's expression softened. Brave girl, that one, too brave for her own good. She reached beneath her desk and produced a key. "Second floor, last door on the right. Be quick, and take the back stairs when you leave." Flynn thanked her and moved swiftly up the stairs. Beatrice's room was small but neat, with a narrow bed, a dresser, and a small writing desk by the window. Following her instructions, Flynn located the loose floorboard beneath the bed and pried it up carefully. The packet of documents was exactly where she'd said it would be: property deeds, letters, and what appeared to be financial records showing suspicious transfers of mining claims. Flynn tucked them securely inside his shirt and replaced the floorboard. He was halfway to the door when he heard heavy footsteps on the stairs. "Check every room," came Sheriff Walters' gruff voice. "And when you find him, bring him to me alive." Flynn glanced around quickly, spotting the window that overlooked an alley behind the building. He moved silently across the room, easing the window open just as the doorknob began to turn. In one fluid motion, Flynn slipped through the window and onto the narrow ledge outside. The drop to the ground was about 15 feet, not pleasant, but manageable. He lowered himself as far as he could before letting go, hitting the ground with a jarring impact that sent pain shooting up from his ankles to his knees. "There he is," a voice shouted from above. Flynn didn't wait to see who had spotted him. He darted down the alley, zigzagging through back streets toward where he'd left his horse. The sound of pursuit followed him, boots pounding on dirt, shouted commands. A gunshot rang out, the bullet splintering wood from a post just inches from Flynn's head. He ducked behind a water trough, drawing his revolver. "That's far enough," Flynn called out as two deputies appeared at the mouth of the alley. "I don't want trouble, but I'll defend myself if I have to." "Drop the gun, Ironwood," Sheriff Walters bellowed, appearing behind his men. "You're harboring a fugitive and now breaking and entering. That's enough to see you hang." "Funny thing about that," Flynn replied, keeping his revolver steady. "I've seen no arrest warrant for Miss Sinclair, no formal charges filed. Just a woman being dragged through the streets for speaking uncomfortable truths." Walters spat on the ground. "You're a fool if you believe her lies. Mayor Hollister is a respected businessman who's brought prosperity to this town." "By stealing from widows," Flynn challenged. "The documents tell a different story, Sheriff." A flicker of uncertainty crossed Walters' face. "What documents?" Flynn smiled grimly. "The ones that will be in the territorial judge's hands by tomorrow if anything happens to me or Miss Sinclair." It was a bluff. The papers were still tucked against his chest, but one he hoped would give them pause. It did. Walters signaled his men to hold their fire, though they kept their weapons raised. "This isn't over, Ironwood, not by a long shot." "Maybe not," Flynn agreed. "But for now, I'm riding out of town, and you're going to let me. Unless you want to explain to a federal judge why you're so eager to silence those who question the mayor's business dealings." The standoff stretched for several tense seconds before Walters finally lowered his gun. "Get out of my town, And take that troublemaking woman with you. But know this, if either of you sets foot in Colfax again, I won't be so lenient." Flynn backed away slowly, keeping his revolver trained on the men until he reached his horse. Mounting quickly, he spurred the animal into a gallop, not slowing until Colfax was well behind him. The sun was beginning its descent by the time Flynn returned to the ranch. He was dirty and weary, his right shoulder aching where he'd wrenched it during his hasty exit from the window. But he had the documents. Beatrice rushed onto the porch as he approached, her face tight with worry. "I was beginning to fear the worst," she admitted as he dismounted stiffly. "It was a close thing," Flynn acknowledged, retrieving the packet from inside his shirt. "But I got what we needed." Her eyes lit up at the sight of the documents. "You did it. These are everything property deeds showing the original owners, letters threatening the widows, even account ledgers showing where the stolen profits went." She looked up at him, genuine admiration in her gaze. "You took an awful risk." "Let's get inside," Flynn suggested, leading his horse toward the barn. "I'm fairly certain I wasn't followed, but I'd rather not take chances." Over a simple dinner of beans and salt pork, Flynn recounted his encounter with the sheriff and his narrow escape. Beatrice listened intently, her expression shifting between concern, anger, and determination. "We need to get these to Judge Morrison in Santa Fe," she said when he'd finished. "He's known for his integrity, and he has the authority to investigate and bring formal charges." Flynn nodded. "We'll leave at first light. It's a 2-day ride to Santa Fe." He studied her across the table. "Are you up to it? Your injuries—" "I'm stronger than I look," Beatrice interrupted firmly, "and this is too important to delay." Later that evening, as they sat on the porch watching darkness settle over the land, Beatrice broke a comfortable silence. "Tell me about yourself, Flynn Ironwood. What brought you to New Mexico territory?" Flynn considered the question, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon where the first stars were appearing. "After the war, I drifted. Worked cattle drives in Texas, tried my hand at prospecting in Colorado, even rode with the Pony Express for a spell." He smiled faintly at the memories. "Never could settle in one place for long." "Until now," Beatrice prompted. "Maybe," he allowed. "I came through this valley last year delivering horses to the Army at Fort Union. Something about the land spoke to me when I heard this ranch was for sale." He shrugged. "It felt right." "And now you're mixed up in local politics and on the wrong side of the law," Beatrice said ruefully. "Not exactly the peaceful ranching life you envisioned." Flynn's laugh held no bitterness. "Peace is overrated. Sometimes a man needs a purpose beyond himself. And helping a stranger is purpose enough." Her tone was genuinely curious. "Helping someone fight an injustice?" "Yes." Flynn turned to look at her, noticing how the lamplight from inside the house caught the auburn highlights in her dark hair. "What about you? What brought a well-spoken woman like yourself to a rough town like Colfax?" Beatrice's expression grew distant. "After my mother died, there was nothing keeping me in Boston. I had trained as a schoolteacher, and there was an advertisement for one needed in Colfax. The pay was modest, but it offered room and board and a chance to be useful. From schoolteacher to advocate for mining widows is quite a leap," Flynn observed. A smile touched her lips. "One of my students, Jenny Callahan, stopped coming to school. When I visited their home, I found her mother, Mary, in tears. The mining company had declared their claim forfeit, saying her husband had failed to file proper papers before his death." Her voice hardened. "It was a lie. I helped Mary search through her husband's things and found the receipt for the filing fee. When we took it to Mayor Hollister, he laughed us out of his office." "And you couldn't let it stand," Flynn guessed. "No," Beatrice agreed simply. "I started asking questions, discovered Mary wasn't the only widow being swindled. I have some legal knowledge from my father's practice, so I began helping them file complaints, right to the territorial authorities. Which made you dangerous to Hollister and his friends, Flynn concluded. Yesterday was their answer to my latest petition. They claimed I was spreading sedition, turned the town against me. Her hands trembled slightly at the memory. If you hadn't intervened. Flynn reached across the space between them, his calloused hand covering hers. But I did. The touch was brief but comforting. Beatrice withdrew her hand after a moment, but the warmth lingered. We should rest. Tomorrow will be a long day. They departed before sunrise, Beatrice riding Flynn's second horse, a steady bay mare. The documents were secured in Flynn's saddlebags, and both carried weapons, Flynn his Colt revolver and rifle, Beatrice a small derringer she produced from her belongings. Full of surprises, aren't you? Flynn commented when he saw the weapon. A woman traveling alone learns to take precautions, she replied matter-of-factly. Though I admit I'm a better shot with words than bullets. They traveled southeast, keeping off the main roads when possible. By mid-morning, Flynn was increasingly certain they weren't being followed, but he maintained vigilance, frequently checking their back trail. You expect trouble? Beatrice asked during one such pause. Hope for the best, prepare for the worst, Flynn replied. If those documents are as damning as you believe, Hollister won't sit idly by while we deliver them to a judge. They made good progress that first day, stopping to make camp in a sheltered canyon as evening approached. Flynn built a small fire, keeping it low to avoid drawing attention. We should reach Las Vegas by tomorrow afternoon, he said as they ate a simple meal of jerky and hardtack. From there, it's just a half-day's ride to Santa Fe. Beatrice nodded, her eyes reflecting the flickering flames. I still can't believe you're doing all this. Most men would have washed their hands of the whole affair by now. Most men haven't seen what happens when good people stay silent, Flynn replied quietly. During the war, I watched men die needlessly because officers were too proud to admit mistakes or change failed strategies. After a while, you start to recognize the patterns, the powerful exploiting the vulnerable because no one dares speak against them. Is that why you became a medic? To help the vulnerable? Flynn considered this. Partly. I was never much for taking lives, even enemy ones. Saving them made more sense to me. A compassionate heart in a harsh world, Beatrice observed. That's rare, says the schoolteacher who risked her life challenging a corrupt mayor, Flynn countered with a smile. Beatrice laughed softly, the sound unexpectedly melodic in the quiet canyon. Perhaps we're both fools. Perhaps, Flynn agreed, but better a fool for justice than wise in wrongdoing. They fell into comfortable silence, the crackling fire and distant night sounds of the desert enveloping them. Flynn found himself studying Beatrice's profile, the determined set of her jaw, the intelligence in her eyes, the quiet dignity she maintained despite her recent ordeal. In the short time he'd known her, she had impressed him more than most people he'd met in his 30 years. You should get some rest, he finally said. I'll take first watch. Beatrice started to protest, then nodded, recognizing the wisdom in the arrangement. She settled into her bedroll while Flynn positioned himself on a rock outcropping that offered a good view of the approaches to their camp. The night passed peacefully, with Flynn waking Beatrice for her watch shortly after midnight. He slept lightly, as was his habit in the open, but nothing disturbed their camp. They were back on the trail at first light, pushing the horses at a steady pace. By mid-afternoon, as Flynn had predicted, the outskirts of Las Vegas came into view, a growing town that served as a trading hub for the region. We'll stop only long enough to rest the horses and resupply, Flynn decided. I'd rather not linger. The town was bustling with activity, freight wagons loading and unloading, cowboys fresh off the trail looking for entertainment, merchants hawking their wares. Flynn and Beatrice attracted little attention as they watered their horses at the town trough and purchased fresh supplies. They were just mounting up to leave when Flynn spotted a familiar figure exiting the telegraph office, Deputy Grayson from Colfax, the same man who had been dragging Beatrice through town 2 days earlier. "Don't look now, but we've got company," Flynn murmured, subtly inclining his head toward the deputy. Beatrice tensed but kept her face forward. "Has he seen us?" "Not yet, but we need to move. Now." They urged their horses down a side street, hoping to circle around to the Santa Fe road without being spotted. But as they turned a corner, they found their path blocked by 3 mounted men, strangers to Flynn, but the hard look in their eyes told him all he needed to know. "That them?" One of the men called over his shoulder. Deputy Grayson appeared behind them, his face splitting into an unpleasant grin when he spotted Beatrice. "That's them all right, the troublemaker and her knight in dusty leather." Flynn assessed the situation quickly. 4 against 2, with Beatrice not fully recovered from her injuries and limited in combat experience. The odds weren't good. "What do you want, Grayson?" Flynn demanded, keeping his voice level while his hand hovered near his revolver. "Mayor Hollister sends his regards," Grayson replied, his own hand resting on his holstered pistol, "and requests the return of his private property that you stole from Miss Sinclair's room." "There was no theft," Beatrice spoke up, her voice surprisingly steady. "Those documents prove Hollister's crimes. They're evidence, not property." Grayson's expression hardened. "Hand them over and maybe we'll let you ride away from this." "I doubt that very much," Flynn countered. He glanced at Beatrice, a silent communication passing between them. "When I move, ride hard for the main road," he murmured. "Don't stop for anything." Before she could protest, Flynn suddenly slapped her horse's flank while simultaneously drawing his revolver and firing a shot over the heads of the men blocking their path. The startled men ducked instinctively, and Beatrice's horse bolted forward through the gap that opened. Flynn wheeled his own mount around, firing again to keep the men's heads down as he spurred after Beatrice. Gunshots rang out behind them, bullets whizzing past as they galloped down the narrow street. "Head for the trees," Flynn shouted as they emerged onto the main road, pointing toward a densely wooded area beyond the town limits. The forest would provide cover and make pursuit more difficult. They rode hard for several minutes, the sounds of pursuit growing fainter as they wove through the pine trees. Finally, Flynn signaled for them to slow, both horses breathing heavily from the exertion. "Are you hit?" he asked Beatrice anxiously, scanning her for injuries. She shook her head, face pale but composed. "No, you clean," he confirmed. "But they'll be following. We need to keep moving." They knew we were coming to Las Vegas, Beatrice realized. Hollister must have telegraphed ahead to towns along the likely routes to Santa Fe. Flynn nodded grimly. "Which means we can't take the main road. We'll need to go cross-country, stay off the beaten path." "But that will add days to our journey," Beatrice protested. "Better slow than dead," Flynn replied bluntly. "Or the documents falling into Hollister's hands." They pushed on through the afternoon, following game trails and dry creek beds whenever possible to mask their tracks. As dusk approached, Flynn found a defensible position in a rocky outcropping that offered both shelter and a clear view of the surrounding area. "We'll rest here for a few hours," he decided, "but no fire tonight." They ate a cold meal in the gathering darkness, keeping their voices low. Beatrice huddled in her coat against the evening chill, looking tired but determined. "I'm sorry for bringing this danger upon you," she said after a while. Flynn shook his head. I made my choice with open eyes, Beatrice. Still, she insisted, you had a peaceful life ahead of you on that ranch. Now you're running from gunmen and risking your life for a cause that isn't yours. It became mine the moment I cut you free, Flynn said quietly. And maybe even before that, some wrongs just need righting, regardless of whose cause it is. Beatrice studied him in the faint moonlight. You're not like most men I've known. I'll take that as a compliment, he replied with a hint of humor. It was meant as one. She hesitated, then added softly, I'm glad it was you who saw me that day in Colfax. Something in her tone made Flynn's heart beat faster. He was about to respond when a distant sound caught his attention. Horses moving through the underbrush, still far off but definitely approaching. They're tracking us, he said tersely, rising to his feet. We need to move. They gathered their belongings quickly, keeping noise to a minimum. Leading the horses by hand to avoid the sound of hooves on stone, they descended the rocky slope on the far side of the outcropping. There's a river about a mile east of here, Flynn whispered. If we can reach it, we can use it to throw off the pursuit. Moving by moonlight was treacherous, but they had no choice. The sounds of pursuit grew gradually louder behind them, indicating their hunters were following their trail with disturbing accuracy. They must have a tracker with them, Beatrice observed as they carefully picked their way through a dense thicket. Flynn nodded grimly. Probably a local guide who knows this terrain. When they finally reached the river, Flynn led them into the shallows, the water rising to the horses' knees. They traveled downstream for nearly a half-mile before emerging on the opposite bank and continuing eastward. That should buy us some time, Flynn said as they mounted again. But we need to keep moving. Santa Fe is still a good day's ride from here, even if we were taking the direct route. They rode through the night, stopping only briefly to rest the horses. By dawn, they had covered significant ground, and there was no sign of pursuit behind them. I think we lost them, Beatrice said hopefully as they paused on a ridge to survey their back trail in the growing light. For now, Flynn agreed cautiously. But they'll keep searching. Hollister has too much to lose if those documents reach Judge Morrison. The countryside around them was changing, transitioning from dense forest to more open terrain of sage and juniper. Finding cover would be more challenging, but the improved visibility would make it harder for anyone to approach unseen. By mid-morning, they reached a small settlement, just a handful of adobe buildings clustered around a spring. Flynn approached cautiously, alert for any sign of danger. An elderly Mexican man was tending a small garden outside one of the homes. He looked up at their approach, his weathered face curious but not hostile. "Buenos dias," Flynn greeted him. "Is there somewhere we might rest our horses and get some water?" The old man studied them for a moment, taking in their trail-worn appearance and Beatrice's still visible facial injuries. "Trouble follows you, senor," he observed shrewdly. Flynn didn't deny it. "We mean no harm to you or your settlement. We just need a brief rest before continuing on." After a moment's consideration, the man nodded. "Come. You can water your horses at the spring. My wife will have food." The meal of beans, chilies, and fresh tortillas was simple but delicious after days of trail rations. The old couple, who introduced themselves as Miguel and Consuela Ortega, asked few questions but watched them with knowing eyes. "You are running from something," Consuela said finally. Not a question but a statement. Beatrice glanced at Flynn, who gave a slight nod. "Men who wish to silence the truth," she explained carefully. "We carry evidence of crimes against widows and their children, theft of their rightful property by powerful men in Colfax." Miguel and Consuela exchanged a look of understanding. "Such men exist everywhere," Miguel said with quiet bitterness. My own brother lost his land to such thieves 20 years ago. We're trying to reach Judge Morrison in Santa Fe, Flynn explained. But the men following us know we're coming. Is there another way, a route they might not expect? Miguel considered this. There is an old trail, used mostly by shepherds these days. It follows the high country and approaches Santa Fe from the east rather than the north. It is longer, and the terrain is difficult in places, but few outsiders know of it. He drew a rough map in the dirt floor, showing the key landmarks they would need to follow. Flynn committed it to memory, then brushed away the marks. "We've imposed on your kindness enough," he said, rising to his feet. "We should move on before our presence brings danger to your door." "Wait," Consuela said, disappearing into a back room. She returned with a small packet wrapped in cloth. "Food for your journey and this." She pressed a small wooden charm into Beatrice's hand. "For protection." Beatrice's eyes softened. "Gracias, Señora. Your kindness means more than you know." As they prepared to depart, Miguel approached Flynn privately. "3 men passed through early this morning," he said quietly. "They asked if we had seen a man and woman traveling together. They did not seem like men of the law." Flynn's expression hardened. "What did you tell them?" "That we had seen no travelers in days," Miguel replied with a slight smile. "My eyes are old, but they see only what I wish them to see." "Thank you," Flynn said sincerely, clasping the older man's hand. "We won't forget your help." They set off on the shepherd's trail Miguel had described, climbing steadily into more rugged terrain. The path was narrow in places, barely wide enough for the horses, but it was clearly marked by years of use. "These are good people," Beatrice commented as they rode. "Risking themselves for strangers." "Good people exist everywhere," Flynn replied. "Sometimes they just need a reason to show themselves." They traveled steadily through the day, the landscape growing increasingly spectacular as they gained elevation. By late afternoon, they had reached a high meadow surrounded by aspen trees, their leaves just beginning to turn golden with the approach of autumn. "We should rest here for the night," Flynn decided. "The horses need it, and so do we." For the first time in days, he felt secure enough to risk a small fire. The meadow offered clear lines of sight in all directions, and they were now well off any route their pursuers would likely check. As they sat beside the fire, sharing the food Consuela had provided, Beatrice broke a comfortable silence. "What will you do after this is over?" "Return to your ranch," Flynn poked at the fire with a stick, considering the question. "That was the plan. Though I suspect Sheriff Walters might make staying in the area difficult." "I've complicated your life terribly," Beatrice said regretfully. Flynn looked up at her, the firelight illuminating her face and bringing out the auburn in her hair. "Life was getting dull anyway," he said with a slight smile. "What about you? Will you return to teaching?" Beatrice gazed into the flames. "I don't know. I'd like to see justice done for those women in Colfax first, after that." She shrugged. "I came west seeking purpose." "I'm still looking, I suppose." "Purpose has a way of finding you when you least expect it," Flynn observed. Beatrice's eyes met his across the fire. "Like when a stranger cuts you free from a rope in a dusty street." "Exactly like that," Flynn agreed softly. Something shifted between them in that moment, an acknowledgement of the connection that had been building since that first day in Colfax. Neither spoke of it directly, but it hung in the air between them, as tangible as the sparks rising from the fire. They retired to their separate bedrolls soon after, but Flynn lay awake for a long while, listening to the night sounds and thinking about the remarkable woman sleeping just a few feet away. In the space of a few days, she had upended his carefully constructed plans for a quiet ranching life, and somehow, he couldn't bring himself to mind. They reached Santa Fe late the following afternoon, approaching the territorial capital from the east, as Miguel had suggested. The adobe buildings gleamed golden in the late sunlight, the spire of San Miguel Chapel rising above the surrounding structures. "We did it," Beatrice breathed, her expression a mixture of relief and determination. "Not quite yet," Flynn cautioned. "We still need to find Judge Morrison and get those documents safely into his hands." They entered the city cautiously, Flynn constantly scanning for any sign of Hollister's men. The streets were busy with a mix of Anglo, Hispanic, and Native American residents going about their business, a far cry from the frontier atmosphere of Colfax. "The courthouse should be near the plaza," Beatrice said, referring to the central square that formed the heart of Santa Fe. As they approached the plaza, however, Flynn noticed a familiar figure lounging against a hitching post outside a cantina, one of the men who had confronted them in Las Vegas. "Don't look now," he murmured to Beatrice, "but we've been anticipated." She kept her face forward, her posture betraying no alarm. "What do we do?" Flynn thought quickly. "Change of plans. We need somewhere safe to spend the night. Tomorrow morning we'll try to get a message directly to Judge Morrison rather than approaching the courthouse, where they'll be watching." He led them to a small inn on a side street, far enough from the plaza to avoid immediate notice. After securing a room for Beatrice and another for himself, Flynn went out again alone, moving carefully through the growing dusk to scout the area around the courthouse. As he suspected, he spotted two more of Hollister's men positioned strategically near the building's entrance. They were expecting Flynn and Beatrice to make a direct approach. Returning to the inn, Flynn shared his findings with Beatrice over a simple dinner in the small dining room. "We need another way to reach the judge," he concluded. Beatrice considered the problem. "What about his home? Surely a territorial judge would have a residence in the city." "Possibly," Flynn agreed, "but we don't know where that is, and asking too many questions might alert Hollister's men." "Wait," Beatrice said suddenly, her expression brightening. "When I was researching territorial law for the widow's case, I corresponded briefly with Judge Morrison's clerk, a Mr. Abernathy. He seemed sympathetic to our cause if we could find him." "That could work," Flynn nodded. "A clerk would be less closely watched than the judge himself." The next morning, they split up a calculated risk, but necessary. Beatrice went to the marketplace, where she could blend in with other female shoppers while casually inquiring about Mr. Abernathy's whereabouts. Flynn positioned himself across from the courthouse, watching the comings and goings while remaining inconspicuous. By mid-morning, Beatrice returned to their arranged meeting place, a small church garden several blocks from the plaza. "I found him," she reported triumphantly. "Mr. Abernathy lives in a boarding house on Agua Fria Street. He takes his lunch each day at a cafe near the state offices." "Well done," Flynn said with genuine admiration. "We'll approach him there public enough to discourage any immediate trouble, but not so public that we can't speak privately." They waited at the cafe Beatrice had identified, positioning themselves at a corner table with a good view of both the entrance and the street outside. Shortly after noon, a thin, bespectacled man in a neat suit entered, exactly matching Beatrice's description. "Mr. Abernathy." Beatrice approached him directly, keeping her voice low. "I'm Beatrice Sinclair. We corresponded about mining claims in Colfax County." Recognition flashed across the clerk's face, followed quickly by concern as he noted her still-healing injuries. "Miss Sinclair, I heard troubling rumors about your situation. Are you all right?" "I am, thanks to Mr. Ironwood here." She indicated Flynn, who had moved to join them. "But we need your help urgently. We have documents proving Mayor Hollister's systematic theft of mining claims, but his men are watching the courthouse." Abernathy glanced nervously around the cafe, then nodded. Judge Morrison should see this. He's been suspicious of Hollister for some time but lacked concrete evidence. He lowered his voice further. The judge is hearing cases today, but he returns to his residence by 4 o'clock. I can take you there directly. Hollister's men are watching for us, Flynn warned. If they see us with you. There's a service entrance to the judge's property, Abernathy assured them. Meet me at the cathedral at 4:30. I'll lead you there safely. The hours until their meeting with Abernathy stretched interminably. Flynn and Beatrice kept moving, never staying in one place long enough to attract notice, always watchful for Hollister's men. Finally, the appointed hour arrived. They slipped into the cool interior of the cathedral, where Abernathy was waiting as promised. Without speaking, he led them through a series of narrow back streets, eventually stopping before a high adobe wall with a small wooden door. The judge's garden, Abernathy explained, producing a key. He's expecting us. Inside, they found themselves in a lush, enclosed garden surrounding a modest but elegant home. Judge Morrison himself was waiting for them on the portico, a tall, distinguished man with silver hair and penetrating blue eyes. Miss Sinclair, he greeted Beatrice gravely. Mr. Abernathy has told me something of your situation. I understand you have evidence regarding improprieties in Colfax County. Beatrice nodded, retrieving the packet of documents from Flynn's saddlebag. Everything is here. Your Honor, property deeds, falsified transfer documents, financial records showing where the profits went. As the judge examined the papers, his expression grew increasingly grave. This is most disturbing. Mayor Hollister has presented himself as a pillar of the community, but these documents suggest a pattern of systematic fraud. He looked up at them sharply. You realize the danger in which you've placed yourselves by bringing these to me. We've had a taste of it already, Flynn replied dryly. Hollister's men have been tracking us since Colfax. Judge Morrison nodded solemnly. I believe you, which is why I've taken the liberty of arranging protection. He gestured, and 2 U.S. Marshals stepped forward from inside the house. These men will ensure your safety until I've had time to review these documents thoroughly and issue the appropriate warrants. Relief washed over Beatrice's face. Then you believe us. You'll help the widows. If these documents are authentic, and they appear to be, then yes, Miss Sinclair. Justice will be served. The judge's stern face softened slightly. Your courage in bringing this matter forward is commendable, if somewhat reckless. Sometimes recklessness is necessary when facing entrenched corruption, Beatrice replied. The judge's mouth twitched in what might have been a suppressed smile. Indeed. Now, you both look exhausted. Mr. Abernathy will show you to guest quarters where you can rest. We have much to discuss, but it can wait until morning. The following days passed in a whirlwind of depositions, sworn statements, and legal proceedings. Judge Morrison moved with impressive efficiency, issuing warrants not only for Mayor Hollister, but also for Sheriff Walters and several other Colfax officials implicated in the scheme. U.S. Marshals rode out to Colfax to execute the arrests, while others remained in Santa Fe to ensure Flynn and Beatrice's safety. Reports soon came back that Hollister and Walters had been taken into custody without incident, their initial bluster quickly fading when confronted with the weight of evidence against them. It's really over, Beatrice said wonderingly as they sat in Judge Morrison's garden a week after their arrival in Santa Fe. The widows will get their claims back. And more, Flynn added. The judge mentioned restitution for lost income as well. Beatrice smiled, the expression lighting her entire face. I can hardly believe it. When they were dragging me through Colfax, I thought all was lost. Her expression sobered as she turned to Flynn. I never properly thanked you. "No thanks necessary," Flynn insisted. "I'm just glad I was there." "As am I," she said softly. Her hand found his on the garden bench between them, their fingers intertwining naturally. "What happens now? Will you return to your ranch?" Flynn looked down at their joined hands, feeling a sense of rightness that he hadn't expected. "Eventually. Though I'm not sure what kind of welcome awaits me in Colfax, even with Hollister and Walters gone." "Their supporters will still be there," Beatrice acknowledged. "It won't be easy." Flynn met her gaze directly. "Nothing worthwhile ever is." He hesitated, then continued. "I was wondering if you might consider visiting the ranch before deciding on your next steps. It's peaceful there. Good place to think about the future." The invitation hung between them, its deeper meaning clear to both. "I'd like that," Beatrice replied, her eyes never leaving his. "Very much." 2 days later, they began the journey back to Colfax County. With Hollister's men no longer a threat, they could take the main roads, making the trip considerably faster than their flight to Santa Fe had been. They traveled at an easy pace, taking time to truly see the countryside they had raced through before. Flynn found himself pointing out features of the landscape, to Beatrice stands of aspen that would turn golden in the fall, ancient petroglyphs carved into cliff faces, a distant mountain peak that caught the last rays of sunset each evening. And Beatrice, in turn, shared more of herself stories of her childhood in Boston, her father's influence on her sense of justice, her hopes for the future. Each revelation, each shared smile deepened the connection between them. They reached Flynn's ranch on the third day, cresting the final rise as the afternoon sun gilded the modest buildings below. Flynn reined in his horse, surveying his property with new eyes. "It's not much," he said, echoing his words from that first night. "But it could be something fine with time and effort." Beatrice moved her horse alongside his. "It's already something fine," she said quietly, "because it's yours." The depth of feeling in her words made Flynn's heart constrict. He turned to look at her, this remarkable woman who had endured so much yet maintained her fierce commitment to justice and her capacity for compassion. "I was alone when I bought this place," he said slowly. "Thought that's how I wanted it. Now I'm not so sure." A smile bloomed across Beatrice's face. "Are you asking me something, Flynn Ironwood?" "Maybe I am," he admitted. "It's soon, I know. We've known each other barely 2 weeks. But sometimes—" He trailed off, searching for the right words. "Sometimes you just know," Beatrice finished for him. Flynn nodded, relieved that she understood. "Would you consider staying? Not just as a visitor, but permanently. We could build something here together." Instead of answering immediately, Beatrice leaned across the space between their horses and kissed him, a gentle but unmistakable affirmation that sent warmth spreading through Flynn's entire being. When she pulled back, her eyes were bright with emotion. "Yes," she said simply. "I would consider that very seriously." Flynn's answering smile was perhaps the most genuine of his adult life. "Then let's go home," he said, spurring his horse forward down the slope toward the ranch, toward the future they would build together. In the months that followed, Flynn and Beatrice transformed both the ranch and the community around it. With Judge Morrison's rulings firmly established, the mining widows of Colfax reclaimed their rightful properties. Many found renewed prosperity as the silver mines began producing again. Beatrice used her teaching skills to establish a small school on the ranch property, welcoming not only the miners' children, but also those from nearby Hispanic and Native American communities who had previously been excluded from formal education. Flynn expanded the ranch operations, breeding quality horses and gradually building a reputation for fair dealing that drew customers from throughout the territory. The house grew along with their ambitions, adding rooms and refinements while maintaining its simple, honest character. Their wedding, held that winter in the newly completed town church, brought together the diverse elements of their shared community: mining families, ranchers, Hispanic neighbors, even Miguel and Consuela Ortega, who traveled all the way from their remote settlement for the occasion. Judge Morrison himself came from Santa Fe to officiate, remarking with dry humor that it was the least he could do for the couple who had delivered one of the territory's most corrupt officials into his hands. As spring returned to the high country, bringing new growth and possibility, Flynn and Beatrice stood on the porch of their home, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of purple and gold. "You ever regret it?" Flynn asked, his arm around his wife's shoulders. Getting involved in the miners' fight, all the danger it brought, Beatrice leaned into his embrace, her head resting against his chest where she could hear the steady beat of his heart. "Never," she said firmly. "If I hadn't, I wouldn't have been dragged through Colfax that day." "And I wouldn't have cut you free," Flynn finished, understanding immediately. "And we wouldn't be here now," Beatrice concluded, turning in his arms to face him. "Sometimes the hardest paths lead to the most beautiful destinations." Flynn brushed a strand of hair from her face, marveling still at how this extraordinary woman had entered his life. "I thought I came west to find land," he said softly. "Turns out I was looking for something else entirely." "And did you find it?" Beatrice asked, though she already knew the answer. Flynn's smile was answer enough, but he spoke the words anyway. "I found everything I never knew I was searching for." As the last light faded from the sky, they remained on the porch, two souls who had found in each other not just love, but purpose, partnership, and the courage to stand for what was right even when standing alone. In the years that followed, the Ironwood Ranch became known throughout the territory as a haven for those seeking justice and a fresh start. Their family grew with the birth of two sons and a daughter, each inheriting their parents' commitment to fairness and compassion. The town of Colfax itself was transformed, slowly but surely, as new leadership emerged from the ashes of Hollister's corruption. The mining widows, led by Mary Callahan, formed an association that ensured no claim holder, male or female, would ever again fall victim to fraudulent seizures. Flynn and Beatrice's love story became something of a legend in those parts, the tale of a woman dragged through town for speaking truth to power, and the cowboy who stopped a horse and cut her free, changing both their destinies forever. It was a reminder that sometimes the most profound acts of courage are also the simplest. To see wrong and refuse to look away, to extend a hand when others withdraw, to recognize in a stranger's eyes a kindred spirit worth fighting for. And in a land where justice often came slowly, if at all, their story offered something precious. Hope that even in the harshest wilderness, love and courage could transform not just two lives, but an entire community. As Beatrice often told their children in the quiet evenings on that same porch where their parents had stood watching countless sunsets together, "Never be afraid to speak your mind or stand for what's right. The road may be hard, but you never know when someone will come along to cut you free."